You know, a lot of these countries that are coming forward with their secret UFO files are South American or Mexican. Uruguay's another one, by the way, on the list. Why do you think it's a more open subject in Latin America?
Well, I think one reason it's more open in Latin America is, number one, they have very, very small militaries. Number two, there isn't this, as I mentioned, this large, unacknowledged, super-secret operation. And so there is more of an intact chain of command on these issues. And number three, they don't have as big a vested interest in the global economy, in the petrodollar, in the energy sector, the conventional energy sector that you see in the United States, Europe, and the Middle East. And so this would all move it towards a position of wanting to be more open about those sorts of events, although there certainly are classified projects in those countries, but they wouldn't necessarily be known. The conventional military and conventional governments down in Latin America, and also a number of other countries, when they do get information, are now more inclined to open it up and share it. But sometimes they will be approached by people who are senior in this so-called Majestic group, what used to be called Majestic 12. MAJIC is one of the code names that I have on a top-secret National Reconnaissance Office document. And they will be approached and persuaded. How they're persuaded, well, is anyone's guess. Threats, intimidations, and inducements to keep something secret, and that certainly does happen around the world. I want people to understand that the secrecy has a global reach, but the official governments of many of these countries do not have really much interest in maintaining the secrecy. The other issue is that in many of these countries where they don't have as corrupt a big mainstream media, you can have events happen that get reported very rapidly. For example, in Mexico and other Latin American countries, there will be mass sightings of a UFO or an event, and it'll be in their media right away. That didn't happen here. It didn't happen, and now it's starting to change. But you look at the things that happened in the so-called Phoenix Lights. That happened in March, and it really didn't break into national news, but only fitfully through some leaks in June of that year. And then they had people coming out saying they were flares from the National Guard doing some exercises or whatnot, which was a total cover-up. Right. So what you find is that in Latin American countries, not only when we would go, for example, to parts of Mexico, we would go to towns that had 100,000 people in it, and 90% of the people had seen the things. They had seen these UFOs coming out of the volcano at Popo. So the question became, I think for many of these countries that are smaller, they don't have these huge centralized military-industrial complex sectors. The media there tend to report these things much more readily, if not in real time. That it's much harder for these governments to maintain any credibility by going along with the cover-up. Now, in the United States, you have until very recently had the opposite. You have, if the media, the big media in the United States deals with this at all, it's usually with derision and ridicule, or at least with a ha-ha factor. Or they'll put somebody on who's an expert on the UFO subject who really doesn't know anything, and they'll have someone who's a debunker on there who seems very polished and has high credentials. Right. And you see people who really do know the truth, like many of our top secret witnesses in our project, will be blacklisted out of the mainstream media because they don't want the truth told to the public. So the media in the United States and much of Europe, the big media and internet, are very, very corrupt and often do not delve into these things. So, and when they do, they're approached by some people who are told, stay away from this, don't do it. And I know this because I've seen it happen. For example, a senior producer with ABC News, the executive producer, in fact, came to my home here before the Disclosure Project and said, look, this is the biggest story in history if it's true. And so I gave him 35 hours of testimony of these top secret military witnesses, as well as documents and a whole lot of material. And he said, boy, we want to do a story on this, on Primetime Live in 2020 and do a town hall sort of thing with a lot of these witnesses there and telling their stories to the public and all this. And, he assured me he was the guy in charge and he could make it happen. And shortly after the Disclosure Project press conference in 2001, he calls me up and he says, well, Dr. Greer, they won't let me do this. And I said, what do you mean? Who are they? And he said, Dr. Greer, you know who they are. So he was absolutely slapped down from being able to do this at ABC News. I've had the same thing happen in big Hollywood producers who wanted to do films on this, true documentaries. I've had the same thing happen with other networks, people who've worked with 60 Minutes at CBS, and et cetera, and so on. So I've had firsthand witness myself to the kind of suppression that happens through the large media here. And you see in Latin America, that's less likely to happen.
Well, even after the press conference at the National Press Club, a lot of the reporters there were very excited about it, and they took our witnesses aside and filmed them separately. And these were reporters from mainstream shows like Primetime Live, 2020, 48 Hours, filming and interviewing our witnesses themselves because they had the intention of putting that on one of their shows, and strangely enough, it never aired.
They were ordered not to. Now,
right.
After this, I was given a document. It's up on our website, disclosureproject.org, where you can get the books I just mentioned. You can get these 4-hour DVDs of the witnesses. You can get the 2-hour DVDs. You can get a 1-hour. You can get the National Press Club event itself. It's at disclosureproject.org. And you can get this nearly 600-page book called Disclosure that has all of this in there. I tell people, anyone who really wants to prove to someone this stuff is real, everything is at disclosureproject.org. Now, what's interesting is that when we were analyzing this in the aftermath, I had a document sent to me that was a CIA document that I understand had accidentally been declassified, but it was dated from 1991 during the end of the first Bush presidency with Papa Bush. And in this document, the CIA is boasting that they have assets in all the wire services, major media, magazines, networks to change or delay stories and alter stories so that they come out to their favor, to what the CIA wants to have happen. And this is, I wrote an article called Media Play that's up on disclosureproject.org, and to it is linked this top secret, this document that got declassified, and I understand was later reclassified during the Cheney years, but we have it, and it's up on our website, and it's an unmistakable admission of the corruption of the mainstream media by the intelligence services. And so the question then has to be asked, how free of a press do we really have when you talk about the large mainstream media in America and Europe? I think not much. But that's changing also. Little by little, they're letting some things come out. But it's very baby steps at this point. And this is one of the reasons why we say people need to go to disclosureproject.org. The information is there so they can write to President Obama and to their two senators and member of Congress and say, look, we want this information out. We want the technologies that, at least for energy generation, to begin to come out. We want a peaceful diplomatic program to contact these interstellar visitors and to demilitarize that response so it doesn't exist within a small clique of militarist-oriented people. And that this needs to happen. It should have never been classified. As Senator Barry Goldwater said to me as I was sitting in his living room, he said it was a goddamn mistake then, and it's a goddamn mistake now that this was ever secret. I'm quoting. He was a pretty blunt guy, and I said, yes, Senator, you're right. But what are we going to do about it? So, and so what I have found is that it takes a lot of public activism and grassroots activism, and that's what disclosureproject.org enables you to do if you go there and see what we're recommending. So It's really quite exciting, though, to see that countries around the world are moving forward without the United States. We're hoping President Obama, who's now been in office just right at a year, will get his hands around the reins of this issue and have the courage to do what none of his predecessors have, and that is get control of these classified projects. I will tell you that in the briefing that I did for Obama that was sent to him and to his new CIA director, Leon Panetta, to the House Intelligence Committee chairman, to the Secretary of Defense, Gates, and to others, senior people in the administration. This briefing has documents in it with project code names and code numbers and locations and facilities, etc., so that if they wish, they can get involved and get control of these programs. Now, it takes a lot of courage. There will be attempts to dissuade the president from doing this. I'm sure there will be all kinds of saber rattling and all kinds of other tricks. But ultimately, the public need to weigh in on this and ask the president to do the courageous and right thing, and to remind him of what Robert Kennedy said, and that is that the really indispensable quality is moral courage to be able to make real change happen. And it is time for this. I think 60 years or more than 60 years of this kind of secrecy is too long. And it's made a mockery out of the government. When you have upwards of 80% of the public knows this stuff is real, and the government keeps just denying that, Roswell was a weather balloon or whatever it was. I mean, it just causes the government to look ridiculous, and people know better. And now you have all these other governments, and not just Latin American governments, but European allies releasing documents. It just makes the United States look like a backwater of silliness. And so people need to write to the president and say, look, we need to catch up with France and United Kingdom and Denmark and these other countries and begin to open up this issue in a credible way, and also begin to phase in these earth-saving and life-saving technologies. As I look at the devastation around the world environmentally, or even the devastation in Haiti, you want to rebuild that country. They don't have fuel to even move the trucks around. And it's because we're still on this 1800s paradigm of fossil fuel supplies and centralized electric power grids. And this is all things, of course, the OrionProject.org are working on to replace. And thank God we have a wonderful scientist who's worked in many top-secret programs, who's now working with us to build up at least an introductory level energy generation system that we hope to have some announcements on sometime this spring or maybe summer. But the President of the United States definitely needs to weigh in on this, and so do members of Congress. And that's how people listening to the World Fusion Network can get involved, is they can share this interview with people in their address book, and then also get people to go to disclosureproject.org. And write to the president. All the information is there, and the links are there, and educate themselves about this really, really important issue.
Another amazing thing people can download on disclosureproject.org is the 6-page cover letter that you wrote for the Obama briefing, and it is the most concise explanation of this entire subject that anyone could possibly want.
Yeah, and it's up there now. We did not release that until a couple of months ago at the end of October, about 3 months ago, less than 3 months ago now. But it is up there at disclosureproject.org. And I would encourage people to read that. It's a very comprehensive overview. And remember that 6-page overview that I did for the president, what else was sent to him were all these other documents and evidence and what have you. But much of that can be had also at the Disclosure Project. And Disclosure Project, all one word, .org, is where you can go to see that, but also to get the Disclosure Project book, The Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge book that also recounts the history of all this, and also the original book that has all these top secret documents and these sort of briefings that I did for the CIA director are in the book Extraterrestrial Contact, the evidence and implications. So those are out there, as well as the new one that is called Contact, Countdown the Transformation. And Contact, Countdown the Transformation, we just released a couple months ago. It has a DVD with it that shows the kind of amazing encounters we've been having all over the world with these extraterrestrial civilizations, and the kind of wonderful things that people can expect into the future as we move into a true interstellar and transdimensional society.